common question that comes up when talking about resource-based economies and societies founded on them is what they would actually look like. What kind of physical form would this kind of society assume? A big part of answering this question would be taking a look at how living systems and environments are designed, as well as how they relate to the systems that they are founded upon. Living spaces, city systems, and other environments, which I collectively refer to as civic design, will be very different in a resource-based economy compared to how things are today. A radically different civic design has the potential to revolutionize people's very way of life, and it's all possible even today. Welcome to the final episode of the Fundamentals of Resource-Based Economies. In this installment, we're going to be focusing on how civic design will take form in an RBE, as well as how it will differ from current models. We're going to be taking a look at some inspirations for civic design in a resource-based economy, and we're also going to dive into detail on how things like city systems would function. We've got a lot to get through in this episode, so let's get started. Today, most people live in cities, bustling, noisy, and often polluted population centres where most economic activity is concentrated. This is to be expected from our current socio-economic paradigm, because it is centred around consumerism and the profit motive. Currently, we have a system of urban sprawl, the continuous expansion of high-density living areas. Most cities are designed for automobiles as the primary mode of transportation, and many urban centres have little to no green space or integration of natural environments. These things and much more make current civic design inefficient, unsustainable, and damaging to physical, mental, and social well-being. Most automobiles today emit pollutants that negatively affect our physiological health. Urban sprawl leads to the destruction of natural habitats and wider ecology, and current city planning is inconsiderate of our physical and social needs. Current civic design is favourable for the needs of profit and economic capital, but makes for environments that are suboptimal for human habitation. So, how can we do things differently? When determining optimal civic design, we need to take a few criteria into account. The first thing we have to account for is human needs, which can be illustrated through the use of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When designing city systems and other environments, we will need to take into account our physiological needs, our social needs, our safety needs, our need for leisure, among other variables. We will also need to take into consideration the needs of nature and ecology, as well as the sustainability of our living systems, which would involve things like taking land conservation into consideration in our design. And because we're basing this civic design around resource-based economics, we will need to design these systems with things like resource management and free access in mind. So the objectives of this new civic design would be to meet human needs and demands as adequately as possible, benefiting physical, mental, and social well-being, while also being as sustainable as possible, especially regarding the conservation of nature and the natural world. When it comes to designing city systems, there are many inspirations and concepts that we can incorporate into our design. The Venus Project seems to be a futurist take on Ebenezer Howard's Garden City design. Circular and radial cities are better than grid systems at preventing urban sprawl. They're also better suited for things like walking and public transit. In a circular model, it takes a lot less time to get from A to B and back to A again. This allows more transport to become short distance, favouring public transportation over individual automobiles. In a circular design, you could even have cities without roads, where the primary transport methods are monorails, subways, walking and cycling. Circular systems can also be designed so that they are divided into belts and sectors. This allows for a standardized and predetermined city structure that can be replicated in each sector, making the city more organized and resource efficient. Circular city design is ideal for resource-based economies, because RBEs for the most part are a steady-state system. Circular cities would be more difficult to expand, and in this case it's intentional. In an RBE, if a city wishes to expand, it will either have to do so vertically or radially. The purpose of this is to conserve land expand as much as possible, but this doesn't mean that circular cities can't grow in population over time. Organisations such as the Vertical City Institute have, in my opinion, great ideas for how we can provide high-density housing to an increasing population while minimising land use. By utilising much more of our vertical real estate, we can create city systems with a smaller land area but with a high population capacity. If we combine the ideas of vertical cities and circular cities, we can potentially create an optimal city system. At the centre of each city system would be a central hub that doubles as a resource management centre, where information about resources, production and distribution will be analysed, in addition to acting as a central meeting place for groups and individuals. As we expand outwards, we begin moving into the different belts of the city system. The most inward belt, which would also be the smallest and most dense, could be zoned for manufacturing and industry, as well as specialised educational facilities. These spaces could also be reserved for things like large-scale research and development. The next important belt of the city system could be a commons belt, an entire section of the city dedicated to commons cooperatives and other organisations. This could include cooperatively or commonly run gymnasiums, cafes, restaurants, or anything else for that matter, with the people running them working to build social capital. Next, we have the residential belt. This is where most people's accommodation will be. It's also where vital services like hospitals will be situated. Furthermore, these zones will have plenty of leisure and recreational spaces, so there would be plenty of things for people to do. These areas could also have small-scale access facilities, such as bicycle ranks, tool libraries, or even small-scale grocery dispensaries. Moving outward from the residential belt, we reach the perimeter of the city system. Here, we could zone for agriculture, as well as water and energy production. In between each built-on belt, we could have green belts, comprised of parks, woodlands, ponds, rivers and lakes, as well as natural habitats for urban wildlife. These green belts would allow people sufficient interaction with nature and the natural world, and would serve as kind of a buffer between the different belts. Let's start with three of the basic things a modern society needs to function: food, energy, and water. Within our agricultural belts, we would use a variety of vertical farming methods, including hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaponics, and also the synthesis of meat proteins. Here, we will also have our food storage systems, where we can store surplus food for later use, much like a battery. Since most menial work will be automated, so will these farms. People would be able to either come and collect the things they need, or have their sustenance delivered to them via automaton or automated drone. There are a variety of methods we could use to generate potable water for our city systems. If a city system is situated near the coast or is close to a large water source, various methods of desalination could be used. Where water sources are distant, or in places where drawing from local waters would be unsustainable, we could use things like air wells and atmospheric water generators. The methods of energy generation used in each city system would vary depending on their location. Although a diverse energy mix is still desirable, with proper safety measures in place, nuclear energy could serve as a clean, abundant, and relatively safe baseload, with a variety of wind, solar, hydroelectric, geothermal, and other sources being used as a supplemental power source. All of this power would be fed into grid batteries, where it could be used on demand as and when needed. We could even go as far as to integrate energy generation into our architecture, using things such as photovoltaic glass and even concrete. If we integrated all of these methods and technologies into our city systems, we could provide a sustainable abundance of energy, food, and water to the inhabitants of our living systems. The next thing we have to consider in our civic design is what modes of transportation we will use. Circular city systems, especially ones that utilise their vertical real estate to its full potential, will likely have a smaller physical footprint than modern cities, and because of this, individual vehicles for inner city transportation will be rendered kind of obsolete, especially considering how public transport methods would function just as well while being more efficient. The reason I like monorails and subways is because they're fast, easy to electrify, and can carry a large number of people. They can also be easily designed for magnetic levitation, which can increase speed even further. If people wish to travel more autonomously, there will be plenty of options for that. It doesn't seem like cycling is going anywhere anytime soon, and we are also seeing the advent of what is known as microtransit. We could have ranks of electric bikes, scooters, and other compact electric vehicles that people can use to get around. Ideally though, we would want to make our city systems as walkable and cyclable as possible. This would reduce our energy use, as well as encourage more physical activity, which will improve people's health. Some of these aforementioned transport methods could also be used for logistics, albeit with a bit more automation mixed in. Ideally, we would use high-speed maglev trains for intercity transit, and in the future, we might even be able to eliminate the need for air travel. I think it's safe to say that the automobile for day-to-day use is obsolete, and now it's time to move forward. When thinking about fulfilling people's need for housing, we need to think about how we can meet people's demands while also being land and resource efficient. We can't give each person a large house and a parcel of land. What we can give people access to, however, is the utility of the aforementioned in a more condensed form. What do I mean by this? Apartments only really have one big inherent flaw, and that is the lack of personal garden space. However, there are ways around this. Provided you use the right support, you could have apartments with reasonably sized outdoor spaces. Imagine a balcony but scaled up. Each household, depending on their preferences, could customize these spaces to their liking. They could turn it into a garden, an outdoor swimming pool, or anything else for that matter. A potential downside here could perhaps be a lack of solar coverage. In a block of apartments that was entirely vertical, this would clearly be an issue. However, if we design these buildings with a slight incline as they increase in height, not only could we improve stability, but also the sky will be visible from each outdoor space. But what about indoors? Here is where things get interesting. Imagine if we were to make each apartment or living space almost entirely modular. Think about it this way. Today, a decent sized home might have a living room, a dining room, a few bedrooms, and maybe even an office or study. However, it is unlikely that people will use all of these rooms at the same time. So what if, instead of having a big house with all these different rooms that serve all these different functions, we instead give people access to modular, open-plan living spaces? Someone could access one of these spaces and have the majority of it serve as a lounge at one time of the day, a dining room the next, and a bedroom after that. With multiple occupants, we could have a modular wall system that people could use to partition their living spaces. When it comes to the size of these living spaces, we can actually be fairly generous. A 20-meter long, 10-meter wide, 4-meter high living space would provide ample real estate for people to play around with. With high amounts of modularity, we may be able to reduce this without affecting quality of life. Having this modularity in living spaces means that most people's wants or needs when it comes to housing can be efficiently and adequately provided for. Why would you want a mansion when you could have the utility of the aforementioned all in one room? Of course, since this is a resource-based economy we're talking about, these living spaces will operate on access instead of ownership. What does this mean for housing? Well, it means that the availability of housing will be based on what living spaces are vacant rather than who owns them. Housing will almost always be semi-permanent, and that's okay, because we will design city systems to have a maximum capacity, which means we can build living spaces to match that capacity, and this means that there will always be a vacant living space for each individual or household. Think about it like cubicles. If the door is locked or someone resides there, the living space would be considered in use, meaning people could only enter with the inhabitants' consent. However, if a living space is open, ready to use, and no one is currently living there, then it's vacant and is free for people to use or move into. This has its advantages. Abundant and freely accessible housing means no homelessness. Everyone will have a place they can call home, or places for that matter. One perk the richest of us enjoy today is being able to live in multiple places around the world at once. Put RBEs and housing together, and this applies to everyone, because everyone would quote unquote own every living space simultaneously, rendering the need for owning multiple homes obsolete. Everyone would have millions of customizable living spaces all around the world accessible to them at any given time. Ever Ever wanted to travel? Well, in an RBE, you could do so with ease. You could live in one part of the world 1 month, and then move to somewhere entirely different the next. So, when it comes to housing in a resource-based economy, people could have their cake and eat it too, all while being efficient and sustainable about it. Now, how would we fit all of these living spaces into each city system? The sky's the limit, quite literally. If we built each apartment block 100 stories high, and each of these buildings had a 50-meter radius, with a hollowed out centre, we could have approximately 50 living spaces per floor, which would equal about 5,000 living spaces per building. And if we daisy-chained, say 60 of these, in a circular fashion, we could have 300,000 individual living spaces per city, all while keeping the city system within a 2-kilometer radius. This means we can provide a sustainable abundance of housing within a relatively small land area, something that would seem very impossible to do today. We can also add offshoots to these buildings to utilise even more of our virtual real estate. We could have sky gardens, meeting places, leisure facilities, and even more. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what kind of architecture we are capable of in an economy free of money, debt, and servitude. Accidents happen. Fires break out, people have accidents, people get sick, among a whole litany of things. In an RBE, ensuring people have access to emergency and vital services, such as fire services and hospitals, is crucial, maintaining and improving public health. Say we split a circular city system into eighths. We could have 1 to 2 hospitals per partition, depending on anticipated demand. These would be in close proximity to residential areas, so they can be accessed as quickly as possible. I will go over how healthcare might work in a resource-based economy at another time, but for now, let us continue. Previously, I have talked about the collaborative commons, and how people would be incentivized through social capital and other personal interests to conduct social and cooperative enterprise. But where would all of this activity take place? In each of our city systems, we could have a mall, but not a shopping mall, no. This would be a commons mall, a place where individuals and groups can set up their own social enterprise. It's a place where people can be creative, share ideas, sample goods and services, and much more. We could operate these places in a similar manner to housing, albeit with some scaling adjustments. It's no secret that living in a bustling city can have a negative impact on your health, but this isn't just caused by noise and air pollution. Several studies have shown that a disconnectedness from nature has a negative impact on our health and well-being, with more connectedness to nature having the opposite effect. At the same time, we are living in an increasingly technologically advanced civilization. So how can we balance the two? Following the philosophy of pursuing access abundance, it's only logical that we pursue abundant access to nature. We can do this by ensuring our city systems have adequate green space, including in elevated locations. We can do this via things like integrating gardens into tall buildings like apartment blocks. The land saved from our dense city design will also ensure an abundance of green space. Human-animal contact has also been shown to have positive effects on people's mental health. But modern cities aren't exactly the most hospitable place for members of the animal kingdom. As part of integrating nature into our city systems, we could also start incorporating some forms of wildlife as well. Not only would this provide a boost to public health, it would also greatly improve biodiversity. But to go even further than this, there's also something else we could do. I, and I'm sure many other RBE advocates, believe that technically advanced civilization is a good thing, but I also believe that technology is good provided you have the autonomy and agency to separate yourself from technology whenever one wishes. With this in mind, an idea I've thought of is to have more primitive, low-tech areas within some cities. People could enter these areas whenever they wanted and return to civilization when they feel like it. This allows people who want to temporarily separate themselves from the technological world their agency to do just that. Continuing with the theme of individual and group autonomy and agency, Our city systems could be split up into different autonomous sectors based on different needs, interests, cultures, etc. These autonomous communities could either form from the floor of an apartment block, an online society, or maybe even a sectioned off area of a city. This would allow for vibrant cultural expression, the freedom to pursue hobbies and interests to their full potential, and also the fulfillment of specialized needs. You might have a community that's themed around gaming, art, or science, or perhaps special communities for people who need caring for, such as those with severe mental health issues. If we had this kind of system in place, there wouldn't be no quote-unquote culture war, because if people wanted to live with others who had similar values and interests, they could simply move to somewhere that fits them. In a community based around sports, you might see lots of sport equipment and people playing table tennis. In a community based around art, you might see loads of portraits, or you might see vibrant pastel colours splashed against the walls. It all comes down to the preferences of the individuals and groups living there, and the great thing about that is everyone has the autonomy and opportunity to live their life how they see fit. It's a general fact that cities tend to be inhabited by lots of people, and lots of people means lots of waste, and lots of waste can unfortunately lead to things like litter. Sans the obvious habitual changes we can make to reduce this issue, this is a problem that can be solved through technical means. We want to keep the place tidy, as well as protect local ecology. Having a few robots roam around, collect litter, and dispose of it properly will ensure that litter never becomes an issue. I never entirely understood why we have separate bins for recycling and general waste, because firstly, you're relying on individuals to even recycle in the first place, and also, many people don't know what to recycle and what not to recycle. What I would prefer is a universal waste collection system, where instead of relying on individuals to sort their waste, all materials will be sorted at a recycling facility using various automation solutions. This way, we can ensure that we're recycling as much as possible, are recovering as much resources as possible, and are also doing so with a high degree of efficiency. Since we're looking at cultivating a circular economy, it would be beneficial to integrate our recycling and reprocessing into our manufacturing and production facilities, thus making more use of old resources and making our production cycles that much more sustainable. What's life without having fun and enjoying ourselves? Leisurely activities make us happy and oftentimes more social. Through things like the collaborative commons and providing abundant access to nature, we can ensure that our leisure needs are fulfilled. But we can also go a step further than this. Something I find quite paradoxical is that while modern cities are filled with lots of people who frequently interact with each other, social interaction is a scarcity for a significant number of people, and despite living in cities, many people feel lonely and isolated. When was the last time you had a conversation with someone on public transport, for example? It seems modern cosmopolitan society suffers from a kind of stranger syndrome. Thankfully, however, it doesn't have to be this way, especially in the context of a society with a resource-based economy. I imagine that with much more free time, people will host a lot more meetup events. In terms of our civic design, we could have dedicated social spaces where people could meet up and do activities together. Having autonomous communities, like I mentioned earlier, would allow people to group together who have similar interests. The key thing here, really, is to build an environment that is conducive to social interaction, which will go a long way in fulfilling our social needs as defined by Maslow's hierarchy. What we're really looking at in our civic design is building an environment that is fit for human habitation. To similar degrees but in different ways, modern urban centres are just as inhospitable as some areas of the wilderness. One was designed for profit, the other wasn't really designed at all. Designing an environment for human habitation doesn't necessarily mean going back to absolute nature, neither does it mean abandoning it. If we are to design environments that are optimal for human habitation, then we must draw from the best of both. Technology has and can continue to help humanity immensely, yet there are many aspects of nature which are beneficial to us, yet we miss out on in our modern day lives. Nature and technology even converge in a technique known as biomimicry. This is the art of building a design based on inspirations from the natural world. A trivial example of how this can be implemented in our civic design is sun and UV protection. Many early humans lived in areas of dense jungle and woodland, which meant they had a natural abundance of shade and general protection from the sun. Where planting trees is impractical, we can build structures that are specifically designed to provide people shade when needed. For humans, the optimal exposure pattern is short periods of sun exposure followed by longer periods of shade. This ensures that we absorb not too little but not too much UV light. Designing our environments with little things like this in mind only makes sense, as does things like making areas more walkable by making more things in close proximity and using specific materials for our walkways, as this will improve public health over time. Creating environments that are beneficial to public health is a key aspect of having a civic design that is fit for human habitation, along with improving well-being through providing abundant and free access to things like our basic and leisurely needs. Having a civic design that does all this, and does it in a highly sustainable manner, is not only ideal within a resource-based economy. A world free of money, debt, trade, or servitude makes these design ideas ever more likely to materialize into reality, so that we can have city systems and other environments that are beneficial to individuals, groups, and humanity as a whole, as well as the planet we all live on. The civic design I talked about in this episode, combined with other concepts such as resource management systems, access over ownership, and gift economics, all come together to create a natural law, resource-based economy. It's been a long road this last half year, and I feel that even though this is still a small channel, we've come a long way. So now, I think it's time for me to say thank you to the people who've subscribed to this channel, the people who've left motivational comments on my videos, and also the people who've just helped get the word out. On this channel from now, I'm going to be doing a variety of related stuff, including maybe a mini conclusion to this series. However, this is all from me for now. I'd like to thank all of you for watching this video and my other content, and also in joining me along the way in the hope of creating a better world for our future. I've been Adam, this is me, signing off, and I'll catch you all next time. Have a good one.